Hey, it's Matt, and for the second straight week, I have to give a little mea culpa. We have been attacked by technological gremlins, first in my live stream with former DNC chairman Jamie Harrison last week, which, if you caught it live, you at least caught some of it, but the recording and the live stream was so beset by technological glitches that I ultimately didn't feel like it created a recording that was good enough to put up on the podcast. So I didn't do it. I just skipped it, and a lot of that will be lost to history. And then this week, I was really excited to welcome back an old friend of mine, a multi-time guest on this show, the New York Times and now New Yorker journalist Jason Zengerle, to talk about his new book about Tucker Carlson. And once again, we had a little bit of a glitch. About 2 minutes in, I looked up and discovered that the recording had stopped. The live stream had stopped. It was no longer going out live. So I restarted it. We reacquired a lot of the audience, but we lost the beginning part of it from the recording. So here's what's about to happen. I'm going to redo my introduction, and midway through, I'll blend it into what we actually recorded and captured. And then the rest of the interview unfolded with Jason relatively straightforwardly, although he had to join us because he's on back-to-back interviews as part of his book tour. He had to join us from a coffee shop, so you will hear a little bit of background noise, but his very lucid brain was very much up to the task, and we had a fascinating conversation. With that, here we go. Here's my introduction and the rest of my interview with Jason Zengerle. Welcome to the Worth Knowing live stream on my Substack, Worth Knowing with Matt Robeson. And we're on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, LinkedIn, and of course on YouTube, where you can join us in both portrait and landscape format, meaning, I guess, that this message is coming to you no matter how your orientation changes over time, which is really what today's discussion is all about. And it's an important topic, perhaps the most important one driving American politics for the last quarter century. It's pretty common in media circles to ask, what the hell happened to Tucker Carlson? What people really mean is, how did a highly respected political journalist, lauded for his profiles of George W. Bush in 1999 and his annihilation of the anti-tax advocate Grover Norquist, slowly metamorphose over 27 years into a talk show host who routinely platforms conspiracy theorists, anti-Semites, right-wing extremists, and straight-up crazy people while talking up the authoritarian Russian regime, promoting Holocaust revisionism, and fueling white and Christian nationalist groups here and abroad? That exact same question could be applied to Republicans as a political party and conservatism as an ideology. As GQ put it, Tucker Carlson idolized Hunter S. Thompson ever since reading Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Well, he's now become a full-time megaphone for Fear and Loathing. Ditto conservatism. Ditto the Republican Party. Of course, not all of them. I host a weekly show with a Republican political operative who is one of the lonely few still fighting for a throwback version of conservatism and the Republican Party that he believes can still exist. But those kinds of Republicans have become fewer and farther between. This is Tucker Carlson's movement now. So what the hell happened? I've said on this show before that for people like me, who worked heavily in politics for many years as Democrats, we thought we were up against an extreme version of the right. But in my more than a decade on Capitol Hill, I still had Republican friends and colleagues who I worked closely with and who I could still write real legislation with. As a congressional campaign manager for one of the most closely contested congressional races in the country in 2012, which we ultimately won by around 3,000 votes, when it was all done, my counterpart, the Republican, and I went out for a drink together. True story. But all of that has turned so rapidly in the years afterwards. The person who saw it coming better than almost anyone else was Tucker Carlson. The person who rode or maybe fueled that wave to its greatest heights, with the exception, of course, of Donald Trump himself, was Tucker Carlson. The person who got crushed in the collapse of that wave the hardest, again with the exception of Trump, was Tucker Carlson. And now the person who seems to be on the rise again more than ever before is Tucker Carlson. So why? What did he see? And what does it help us to understand about what's happened to America? New book takes us through that journey and tries to answer those questions. The book is called Hated by All the Right People, Tucker Carlson and the Unraveling of the Conservative Mind. The Washington Post calls it mordant, insightful, vigorously reported, and yes, deliciously entertaining. The reviewer went on to say, "Please, Jeff Bezos, don't fire me. Good gracious, don't you care about journalism?" All right, I'm kidding about that last part. The New York Times book review said the book is breezy, entertaining, and ultimately just delightful, which coincidentally is what I have on my business card. And an Amazon reviewer wrote last week that the author has crafted one of the most compelling and insightful political books I've read in years. This is a carefully reported, nuanced, and razor-sharp exploration of how media, ideology, and power intersect in America today. That's perfect. No notes. We are very fortunate to welcome back the author that was a previous multi-time guest on my long-standing podcast, Beyond Politics, and award-winning journalist whose reporting has appeared in GQ, the New York Times Magazine, and now the New Yorker, and who is in no way responsible for our technical yips.
I'm really sorry for the technical yips, especially coming to you from a coffee house at the moment because I'm traveling, and this was the only place I could do it. I'm sorry if you hear the background noise.
No, man, it's not you. It's me. This happened with former DNC chairman Jamie Harrison last week.
Oh, good.
And I literally, all right. I'm going to treat you better than I treated him because it was so bad that I said, Jamie, you're an experienced media mogul now. I'm handing this off to you. I'm going to log out and log back in. He had to vamp for like 5 minutes.
Oh, God, don't do that to me.
No, I'm not doing that to you. I swear, I'm not. I don't want to give away the story here, but I want people to actually buy this book. So just start us out with, what's something you found in the course of your reporting that's really going to surprise people when they read the book? Something that surprised you that you think is not well understood about Tucker Carlson or the larger right-wing transformation that you got?
Well, I mean, I think that, this did not surprise me. I knew this going in, but it was one of the reasons I wanted to do the book. Like, Tucker was a really good magazine reporter and a really good writer. And, when he started his career at the Weekly Standard, I felt like, and he was someone I knew at the time and read his stuff and, kind of admired. And I thought that a lot of people who have only come across him in the last decade or so would be surprised by that. So that was one of the reasons I did want to write about him, because he started in such a different place. And I felt like, exposing that side of him to people today who, loathe him, they would sort of say, oh, this guy, 30 years ago, I probably would have liked him. So I thought that was interesting. The thing that surprised me the most, actually, he after he got fired from CNN, he went to MSNBC, and he had a show that no one watched there. But I was, and including myself, but when I was doing the book, I went back and, read all the transcripts of the shows, and it was interesting to me how much he was changing. Even then, this would be like 2005, 2006, 2007. He was really becoming a paleo-conservative at that point, which I did not know. I thought his ideological transformation was more recent, but after the Iraq War, he really started, I think, to rethink a lot of his political priors and his ideological priors, and he really started to look at Pat Buchanan differently. Pat Buchanan was someone, when he was at the Weekly Standard, he'd been kind of taught to hate and to sort of try to read out of the conservative movement. But after Iraq, he, I think, started to wonder, like, what Bill Kristol been wrong, what else Bill Kristol been wrong about. He started to wonder, what else has Pat Buchanan been right about? And so you see, even in those sort of MSNBC show days, him becoming much harder line on immigration, more skeptical of free trade. And that to me was a surprise, because I figured all that stuff kind of came much later and came when Trump was around, but he actually was already sort of heading in that direction before Trump.
In your New Yorker piece, which is adapted from your book, you recount how Carlson went through this moth-like metamorphosis in 2009 after being fired from his job as, a primetime anchor for MSNBC, as you just said. And then he got this unexpected lifeline, this phone call from Roger Ailes at Fox News. And it seemed in your recounting of it like he was determined to make this work. And then, of course, there was the more recent firing from Fox and his reincarnation on X and then YouTube. What did these two firings have in common? And how are they different? What did they do, each of them, to the trajectory of his evolution?
Well, his firing from MSNBC, that was probably like his personal and professional nadir. To get fired from MSNBC was the third place cable network. Like, no one was watching his show to begin with. To be fired from there, like, that's pretty bad, right? If you're not good enough to even last at MSNBC. And this is like I guess Keith Olbermann was on the air then, but he got hired at MSNBC pre Olbermann. His firing from Fox, like, he was riding high when that happened. He was, he had the most watched cable news show on, ever in history. It was front page news in the New York Times when he was fired from Fox. And I think, obviously, I don't think he wanted to be fired, but I think he had achieved a place of prominence and sufficient enough power that he could bounce back from that in a way that, when he was fired from MSNBC, he was desperate to stay in television, and Roger Ailes kind of threw him this lifeline that came with a lot of baggage because Ailes did not like him and wanted to humiliate him, and Tucker sort of in exchange for that humiliation, was given like a third tier pundit role at Fox, which he happily took because he was so grateful just to maintain any kind of foothold or toehold in television. And there was a little bit of money too. When he left Fox in 23, when he was fired, suddenly he had he was not as desperate. He had a lot more options. He had he's going to have to work hard to stay relevant. I think a lot of people sort of assumed he would fade away, and he is not. But it was just a very different. He was on a much more solid footing at that point, I would say.
I will point out from Jim Williams' comment that you do not have a Substack. You were the last journalist in America, as far as we can tell, who does not also have a Substack. So
I think I had to do a Substack interview this morning, and I think I created one for it, so it should just be my name. I think I don't know how it works, and I will say the stupid headphones worked for that, so I'm really sorry again.
Don't worry, but people can find you now at the New Yorker.
Yeah, I think, but I don't really have anything on it, so I haven't at least populated it yet.
Well, there you go. I want to ask you about something that I teased in the intro about what I ultimately want to get at is Tucker Carlson a driver or a passenger in everything we've seen in the last 25 years? You say that, and this is what I was starting to allude to a moment ago, that people like Bill Kristol and Tucker Carlson went in very different directions. And it seems in your recounting here that Carlson is sort of a masterful reader of the evolving incentives in the media ecosystem. He sees the writing that's on the wall. He was very prescient about seeing where the world was going in advance of the rise of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Do you think he was a passenger in that car and he's like, oh, okay, I know where the destination is and I'm going to try to prefab myself to be ready for when we get there? Or do you think he helped to drive?
Is it a cop-out to say both? I mean,
yes,
I think,
but that's okay.
He's responding to the incentive structure, or the incentives that exist. Are we passengers because we decided to go to college and because that was the thing that was being rewarded at the time in terms of the job market? I don't know. I think he's just responding to what the incentives are in the sort of conservative media ecosystem and in the conservative political ecosystem. I mean, he is not like a total finger in the wind person. I mean, I think the thing that's made him as successful is like Wayne Gretzky. They used to talk about how he skates to where the puck is going to be. Right. Like that's what Tucker does, and that's what he's done over the past 10 years. He's managed to stay a few steps ahead of where things are going. So it's not exactly being a passenger, but he's not operating entirely on his own free will either. But I think he's doing what he thinks is going to make him successful. But plenty of people put their fingers in the wind and they don't actually achieve what he's achieved. He also has some prescience and some foresight that I think is pretty important in terms of his own success.
He's reading where the customer base is going.
He's what?
He's reading where the customer base is going.
Yeah, exactly. No, and that, I mean, in the book, I spend a lot of time writing about the Daily Caller, which is this website that he ran after he was fired from MSNBC and while he was kind of laboring in the salt mines at Fox before he had his primetime show. And the thing that he got at the Daily Caller was he got a real-time read on what American conservatives liked and wanted because he could see what articles they were clicking on. And, after 2012, when Romney lost, the conventional wisdom among Republicans was we have to moderate our stances on all these social issues and especially on immigration. We're never going to win the White House again unless we become moderate on immigration. And so when Donald Trump came around in 2015 and is running this, explicitly nativist anti-immigrant campaign, almost every conservative pundit dismissed him as a sideshow and a fluke, just someone who wasn't going to matter at all. And, Tucker, because of what he saw at the Daily Caller and what articles were getting, traffic, he recognized the huge gap between what the Republican establishment thought conservative voters wanted and what they actually wanted. And so while most conservative pundits were saying Jeb Bush is the front runner for the nomination, Tucker was like, I mean, I don't think he really liked Donald Trump personally, but he saw that like a nativist candidate running on white grievance, like there was going to be a lane for that person in the Republican primary, and he arrived at that conclusion a lot sooner than any other conservative pundit. And I think that is that the same thing as being a passenger? I don't know. I think there's like a prescience there that is informed by data, obviously, but also kind of experience and judgment. And I think he wants to try to stay a step or two ahead of everything so he can then form and lead that opinion, which I think is a little bit different than being like a total passenger, if that makes sense.
But something changed. Something changed, and you didn't see it, and I didn't see it, and we were both in different ways very involved in the political world at the time. And that's not to like be self-loathing or self-critical. No one saw it. Almost no one saw what was happening here. You referred earlier to Pat Buchanan. I mean, when he ran in 1992, there was this nativist, racist, base, and there was clearly a constituency for him. He did very well. I can't remember if he came in first or second in New Hampshire, but
He won New
he had a
Hampshire.
moment, right?
Yeah,
And
he
so
won
like
New Hampshire. Yeah.
there was
Or
clearly
88, I think he won New Hampshire. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there was a constituency there. There was always this undercurrent, but it was an undercurrent. And if you cast back to 2015, the entire Republican establishment not only didn't see this coming, they were trying hard to stop it. There was a lot of money and a lot of power lined up against all of this. Now, you could say that, maybe the whole Tea Party grass tops, led AstroTurf movement from Dick Armey back in 2009 kind of escaped lab containment, and they just hadn't caught up to it. But clearly Tucker Carlson did. Was it that experience at the Daily Caller? Was it that experience of looking at the data in real time and chasing the numbers and seeing this is what is fueling eyeballs and this is what's not, that made him realize there was something fundamentally different in the water?
That's what I think. Yeah, I do. I mean, because I think he was sort of making his own kind of ideological transformation at the time, but recognizing like the particular kind of grievance politics that Trump was engaging in, recognizing sort of the traction that would get, I think came from the caller. Because you look at the other person in that period who was running a similar website and was having similar success, that's Steve Bannon. And I think like Tucker and Bannon both, they were able, and Bannon, I think he was already kind of there, but he was able to glean a lot from those sort of just the data, the web traffic. And I mean, look, everybody missed it. Everybody in Washington and New York missed it, obviously. And it's not like Tucker was living in like Rust Belt, Ohio. He wasn't experiencing himself. He was living in the same like liberal enclaves in Washington that everybody, the whole Hillary campaign lived in. But no, he saw something, I think, in the national mood that he was able to see because of that website that I think others just missed.
You told GQ, just to quote you back, I think his calculus, Tucker's, is that he can't afford to lose the Groypers, that you can't be successful in conservative media and conservative politics without the support of neo-Nazis, for all intents and purposes. Is that the basic story of the Republican Party over the last 10 years? Is that sort of, looking forward, the sea anchor that they're going to be tied to in 2028 and moving forward as they try and move into a post-Trump era, that without the support of the neo-Nazis, you can't make it in today's Republican Party?
I think that's what Tucker thinks. I think that's what JD Vance seems to think. I mean, there are people in the Republican Party who don't think that, but I would say the standard bearer for the view that opposes that among elected officials is Ted Cruz. And I don't know, like, do you think Ted Cruz is a good presidential candidate to run as, kind of a guy who doesn't want the Republican Party to be a nativist blood and soil party? But you look at, guys like Vance are way more explicit about it. Others, I think, are just kind of go along to get along. It does seem as if there's a real, fear of losing that segment of the conservative base. They feel like they need them in order to be successful in a Republican primary at this point. So I don't know. I'd like to think that would be a sea anchor, but I don't know if it is. I mean, that's what we're going to find out.
Well, that's the real thing, is that it used to be that Republicans were at pains to keep these people shoved as far back into the back of the closet as they could, that, you know, you kind of were in a tacit, I don't look, I mean, if there's anyone in the audience who's like a Republican leaner, I don't mean to offend you by this, but there was a tacit alliance between the ugly racist segment of the Republican Party and the rest of the mainstream Republican Party for a long time, ever since like the Lee Atwater conversion, the 1988 dog whistle kind of campaign, you know, for George H.W. Bush. You know, it was kind of like an open secret, right? That they depended on this segment of voters, but they didn't want to talk about it. They didn't want it crawling too far out front. That was one of the things that set them into a panic, honestly, about Pat Buchanan's campaigns, was that he was sort of putting this on center stage. And now it seems like they've decided that, no, not only do we need this segment, but it's not so shameful that it's going to kill the rest of the brand and the rest of our candidates, and you can make a pretty good. Is that essentially what's changed here? Is that you know, you actually, it's like, yeah, we've got these people with us. We're the party of Nick Fuentes. So the fuck what?
Well, I think it's that. I think it's also, you know, I don't know if there are any institutions anymore that can read people out of a party or read people out of a movement. I mean, you had, you know, when they tried to read Pat Buchanan out of the movement, they did kind of successfully. You know, you had, you know, kind of the Republican establishment was a lot stronger, you know, and, you know, magazines like the Weekly Standard, people read them and kind of they were influential. You know, obviously, like, you know, go back to Buckley and the Birchers. I mean, you were able to actually read these people out of the movement. I think now, even if you wanted to, I don't know if you could necessarily. And, you know, look, like JD Vance is not trying. I think that, you know, I think the sort of the sophisticated strategy is to, you know, I say sophisticated in quotes, sophisticated strategy is basically say, you know, we're not going to deplatform anybody. We're not here to, you know, pick and choose. And that's what Vance did at the TPUSA conference when, you know, back in December, when it turned into this huge kind of, you know, debate about Tucker and Candace Owens, when Ben Shapiro, you know, gave this speech attacking Tucker and saying he should be read out of the movement, basically. And then Tucker kind of responded, and then, you know, Vance came in to seemingly like settle the score, and he said, I'm not here to say who you can and can't support. And that, like, that, I feel like, you know, that's obviously siding with Tucker, and that's siding with the Fuenteses of the world. And I wonder what it would look like if someone like Vance or someone like Trump, you know, said, like, we draw a line here. I mean, I don't know, like, if any institutions, liberal or conservative, are robust enough these days to actually set up those kind of guardrails. Because so much of our politics over the past 10 years has been about the distrust in these institutions and the destruction of these institutions, that right now, like, there really are no guardrails. And that's what I think is interesting about Tucker, because, you know, the path he's gone down is not, it's not that unusual, especially like among, you know, conservative intellectuals. Like, you know, in the book I read about Joe Sobran, who, you know, was a Pat Buchanan buddy and went like further off the deep end than Buchanan ever did. And he was a protege of William F. Buckley, and, you know, he sort of descended into racism and anti-Semitism, and Buckley fired him from the National Review, and he was expelled from polite society. And when Tucker was young, he used to tell a joke about Sobran. He would talk about how he ran into Sobran at a Denny's, a suburban Denny's outside of DC, and he was sitting by himself, you know, with like long fingernails and dirty hair and kind of holding court, and, you know, holding court to no one because no one wanted to listen to it anymore. You know, and Tucker, like, you could sort of say, like, he's traveled a very similar path, especially like when it comes to racism and anti-Semitism. But the difference is, like, he is not in exile. I mean, he is as influential as he's ever been. And it's not really possible to exile someone like him anymore. I mean, even if you wanted to, I don't think the institutions exist to do so. And I think, like, you're kind of seeing a similar thing with Fuentes. And I guess that's what makes this moment so significant and also so scary.
I thought I read a little bit into that Sobran incident that you recounted, and this is me interpolating, so maybe it's wrongly so, but I thought I meant I read this like Scarlett O'Hara, God is my witness, I will not end up like Sobran. Not me. I mean, this actually literally happened to me when I was working on Capitol Hill. I was in some diner in like Adams Morgan or something, and some old guy who was there kind of alone at the diner, was with my girlfriend at the time, just struck up a conversation with us. Turned out to be a former member of Congress, right? It's like that LBJ story about the elevator operator on his first day. Oh, you're a new member of Congress? Yeah, you're gonna love it. I used to be a member myself. And I could almost see Tucker in that moment saying, you know what? I'm not going to be that fucking guy. And when he gets fired and then he gets this call from Ailes in 2009, it's like, you need me to ride go-karts? I'll go ride fucking go-karts. I do not give a shit. I need to go. So let me actually turn this into a question. That was a soliloquy that I'm going to turn into a question. So there is one thesis out there that Tucker is just a chameleon. He's an opportunist, that he had his Scarlett O'Hara moment and he's like, not that shit. I'm going to be a fucking star no matter what happens to me. But there's another kind of darker version of this that you get into a little bit. You have this section. Well, first of all, there's the famous kind of revelation from the Dominion lawsuit that he described an incident in which there were three guys beating up an Antifa kid, as he describes it, and he says, quote, "It's not how white men fight." Well, that's racist. That's pretty terrible. But you also go a lot deeper, and in your New Yorker piece, you lay out some pretty astonishing stuff about Blake Neff, the head writer at Tucker Carlson Tonight, who was responsible for, in your telling, many of the words that came out of Carlson's mouth. And in 2020, a CNN reporter discovered his auto admit posts, which were pretty brazenly racist. He would later go on to maintain that he was the least racist person on auto admit because he never posted the N-word. So bully for you there, Blake. But it suggests you have this person who, an analysis of the neo-Nazi website, the Daily Stormer, found that between November 2016 and November 2018, Carlson was mentioned in 265 of its articles, back when Blake was his head writer. It does seem to be pretty compelling evidence that this is not him putting on a cloak of media opportunism. This just is who he is. Like, deep down, he really is this kind of a virulent racist. What did you make after doing all of this deep reporting? Is he this person, or is this an opportunistic front?
I mean, he's saying it. Whether he is that or not, I think is actually, I think that's a question probably for his friends and family. But I think what matters is that he says it and that people listen to him. And, I think like it's human nature. Even if you start saying something cynically, if your stance is sort of motivated by cynicism to begin with, like, if you're ultimately rewarded for that and you're successful because of it and you keep on saying it, yeah, you probably come to believe it. I think that's just kind of the way it works for anybody. But I feel like the question of, whether he actually believes what he's saying, in some ways, it's not relevant for us. I mean, unless you're like a loved one or a really good friend, what matters is that he does say it and that people think he's being sincere and therefore they take it that way. And I think that's what ultimately matters. I mean, there's obviously like a strain of, kind of questionable views on race that go back to, he hated affirmative action because he felt like it was discriminating against white people and white men in particular. And, all these things going back to when he was, younger. That's clearly kind of metastasized into something else now. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm just not like equipped to sort of judge like what does, because unless like you sat him down and gave him truth serum, you wouldn't really necessarily know. But he says it a lot, and he seems pretty sincere and pretty convincing when he says it, and people I think take that sincerity and do something with it. So yeah, it's relevant for that. I guess that's where I come down on that question.
He's responsible for it either way.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Is he going to run for president?
I don't think it's something that, he has sort of a Clinton-esque kind of, lifelong ambition to achieve. I do think he has a political project and ideological vision that he wants to see achieved. And, if he had to run for president to achieve that, I could see him doing it. Like right now, he and JD Vance are in total like ideological lockstep. Like there's a mind meld there. Vance is like a fantastic vehicle for him. I could see him running for president, like if one or two things happen. One, if Vance decided to chart a different course and, put some distance between himself and Tucker in terms of what they believe. I could see him doing it then. I doubt JD Vance is going to do that before 2028. I think he's going to run as the platform that Tucker would very much agree with. The other thing would be if JD Vance, if Tucker concludes that JD Vance doesn't have like the political talent you need to actually get elected president, which I don't think he's going to conclude before 2028. But certainly if Vance were to run in 28 and not succeed, I could see Tucker concluding that. And then, I think he would look for someone else to be the standard bearer for his particular, views. But if he couldn't find someone who he felt was talented enough to win, then yeah, I could see him sort of throwing his hat in there, because I think, he doesn't, I think it's a mistake to think of him as a media figure these days. I think he is a movement leader, and I think, he wants to see his movement advance. And if him running himself is the way to advance that, I could see him doing it.
I'm wondering about his firing from Fox and what it says about Fox, because regardless of, it's interesting that you say that he's not so much a media figure as a movement leader. So if he's not really primarily part of the media, let's talk about the right-wing media that is very much the epicenter of the right-wing media. I mean, Fox has been on an interesting trajectory since the Dominion lawsuit settlement and firing their biggest star, which they've actually done several times now. See O'Reilly, Bill. First of all, did you ever get to the bottom of why exactly they fired him, or did you end up with a pet theory? This is like the JFK assassination. Like, what was your leading pet theory? Was it like the CIA from the grassy knoll?
My publisher would probably like me to say that I figured out what it was, and you need to read the book to find out. I did not figure out what it was. I mean, none of the theories. But you put some
theories into the book that
yes, none of the theories that have been advanced are fully satisfactory. But the ones that the ones that at least are most in sort of most frequent circulation, and the ones that people who are in positions to know kind of subscribe to, even though no one besides Rupert Murdoch will ever know. I mean, Tucker himself thinks that it was a part of the Dominion lawsuit settlement, that Dominion wanted $1 billion from Rupert Murdoch, and Rupert Murdoch wouldn't give them $1 billion. So he basically said, I'm going to give you $787 million and Tucker Carlson's scalp. And that was the deal. There's no evidence for that. It doesn't appear, obviously, in any settlement documents. There's no evidence there was even like a verbal agreement, but that's what Tucker thinks. Other people think it had something to do, other people at Fox think it had something to do with the text messages that were uncovered during the Dominion lawsuit discovery, some of which like had pretty vulgar things that Tucker said about other Fox executives, that he was being punished for that. And, that text message you cited about that's not how white people fight, that it was just sort of all the things that were in the text messages. I don't know. Tucker had crossed a lot of lines at Fox up to that point that seemed even worse than that, and he wasn't punished, so it seems hard to believe that they would punish him for that. The theory that to me sounds the most plausible is that it really just turned out it was just Rupert Murdoch just kind of being weirded out by Tucker and thinking he'd gotten too big for the network. And this one particular episode like looms large in that theory, that Murdoch's fiance at the time was a huge Tucker Carlson fan, and Murdoch invited Tucker out to his mansion in California so he could meet his fiance. And the fiance literally thought Tucker was a messenger from God, and treated him as such during this dinner. And it just weirded Murdoch out so much that the day after the meal, he broke off his engagement with this woman, and then 2 weeks later he fired Tucker. So I don't know, that one to me is not entirely satisfactory, but it seems like it explains more than the other ones, at least.
Speaking of mysteries, what's the biggest mystery lingering coming out of this book that you were not able to fully answer to your satisfaction that you wish you could have?
That's a good question. I mean, although I kind of said earlier it doesn't matter whether he believes it or not. I mean, I would have liked to have. I mean, I really wish, I wanted to talk to him for the book. He's someone I've talked to a lot over the years, just right. As a, as a journalist. As soon as I started writing the book, he, that stopped. It would have been interesting.
You overlapped very, very briefly professionally.
Well, we never worked at the same place, but our worlds overlapped. I mean, I was at the New Republic magazine and he was at the Weekly Standard, and one, Standard is conservative, the New Republic's liberal, but everybody was like friendly with each other. And he's just, if you're a political reporter, who's done this stuff over the past 20 years, 30 years, like, Sorry.
Like part of my objective as an interviewer, you're an interviewer, I'm an interviewer. I like to ask people questions that throw them off a little bit.
You know what though? I know he doesn't. He has said he does not do that. So
he doesn't. Okay,
doing
so for
a Fox
people who
show
are
about it,
for old-fashioned throwback types who like to listen to podcasts not as live streams and don't like to watch them as videos and like to listen as audio, like when you're doing the dishes, the Cynthia Rice just asked, "Did Jason find out why Tucker tans his balls?" And that threw Jason off a little bit.
But I found out that he does not do it. He does not do it. He has said that. He
well,
did not tell me that.
Wait, hold on. You buried the lead, man.
Yeah, no, he has said that he does not do that. Even though he obviously did that documentary for Fox kind of promoting it, I think he himself does not engage in that behavior. So anyway, but going back, sorry, I got derailed a little bit there.
Yeah, I derailed you from our derailing.
He is someone that if you do this stuff, like everybody knows him, it's a small world. And, you know, someone who has always been very happy to talk and is quite talkative. And I would have liked to have sort of had some of those conversations with him, especially around some of these questions about race and anti-Semitism that, you know, that I wish I could have gotten into that, because the anti-Semitism stuff in particular, I guess I'm interested in because, you know, when I was doing the book, like I talked to tons of people and a number of whom are Jewish, who are colleagues and friends of his and sort of who are not anymore. But, you know, I would ask them, like, was there any, when you were friends, was there any inkling of this stuff? You know, kind of, especially like the Weekly Standard, which had a lot of Jewish employees there. Tucker used to call himself an Episcopalian neocon. But, you know, asking like people like Bill Kristol and David Brooks, like, did you detect any kind of, you know, even just sort of like waspy, like, you know, anti-Semitism back then? And they all said, like, no, we didn't. So I'd be interested to know, like, where it comes from.
I want to ask you about writing a little bit. This is a very, very weird time to be a journalist. It's a very extra weird time to be a writer. Did it feel strange to you, like a Sean Connery-esque bringing a knife to a gunfight type thing, to write a book about a massive TV and video personnel when you know, I mean, you write for you've written for a series of amazing, right? You know, the absolute A-list, you know, for journalists, for writers, and you're writing a book that, you know, did go through some of the media churn cycle that, you know, we see in the marketplace today, where it is very, very business driven. Did it feel very strange to you in a kind of meta way that you were engaged in this like 1950s, 1970s-esque approach to trying to understand and unpack for an audience this incredibly important figure in this incredibly important pivot in American politics?
I mean, I recognize it's a drop in the bucket, and it's nothing I write will ever reach as many people as, you know, Tucker's podcast, but it's what I know how to do, and it's what I do, and I think there's value in it, and I hope that, you know, and I write it because I do think there's value in it, and I think, like, you know, for me at least, I wanted to do the book because, like, I want people to take him seriously. I don't think you can afford to dismiss him as, you know, he's just out there and he's doing his thing, it doesn't really matter. Like, I think or like no one really takes it seriously themselves. Like, I think you do need to take him seriously, and I wanted to subject him to scrutiny. And, you know, the way in which that message travels, I guess, is, you know, maybe it goes beyond the book. It's, you know, doing interviews like this, or, you know, getting covered, the book getting covered some places. But at the end of the day, it's like the only thing I know how to do. Like, if I, you know, I can't do like a podcast myself or anything like that. It was less a question of sort of the media I chose, as much as just like it's the media that I happen to work in, and it's what anytime I write something, like I'm not fooling myself. Like, I know it doesn't probably have the reach of, you know, a lot of other individuals or a lot of other, you know, platforms, but it's the one that I, you know, for whatever reason have chosen to do as my career, and the only one I know how to do at this point.
And all right, well, let's try this one. This is really like, it's like, you know, trying to explain to a video podcast audience why they should read a physical book, which, by the way, mea culpa, I have purchased your book, but I did it on audiobook. This is my concession. Yes, right. This is my concession to the modern world. I don't read physical books anymore. All of the ones behind me on my bookshelf are real, and I've read most of them. I promise. But Yes, audiobooks I'm sure are great from your standpoint as well. But for people who do like to get their information from sources like this, and a lot of people will kind of like listen to the podcast with the author and be like, I'm good. I've learned everything I need to know. What are people going to get from the experience of listening to or reading the book that you don't get from a podcast summary or even an awesome New Yorker excerpt like I just?
I mean, coherence. I mean, there's a narrative, I think, that is compelling that, you can deliver in a book or a magazine article that you can do in some kind of podcast, right? There are narrative podcasts, but those are heavily edited and they are, sequenced in such a way. But this sort of the thing that we're doing right now, I think is definitely informative. But honestly, I think it would be our conversation would probably be better appreciated and better understood if you actually read the book, because like you're making all these, you and I are both making all these references and these kind of allusions to things that are spelled out in the book. Also, the book is just a more compelling medium in terms of like it's telling a story. It's not jumping around chronologically, it's not jumping around in terms of issues, it's developing characters. I mean, I'm not, writing fiction or anything, but like you do use some of the techniques from fiction in terms of doing this kind of narrative nonfiction, in terms of, scenes and characters and raising stakes so that the reader cares about it in a way, or if you're listening to it, you care about it in a way that you wouldn't necessarily get from this sort of interview. So I think, for me at least, I think, I kind of understand the world in stories. Like that's kind of how I, get information and then, sort of receive it and act upon it. And I think like a book, if that's the way you kind of interpret the world, reading the book I think is the way to go, because I just think it's a more compelling presentation of the information than just me kind of sitting in a coffee shop without AirPods trying to explain it. I think it would make more sense. You would have a better understanding of what my argument is and what he is about and what his whole trajectory is if you actually read the book.
And just
There's my
acknowledging
hard sell.
well, yeah, I'll acknowledge the comment here. Like some people say, I gotta have a physical book. I need the visual. I think it's especially true if you're reading Where's Waldo. I want to, for the kind of closing part of our conversation, this is if we were doing a courtroom drama, the part that the judge would say, or the opposing counsel would say, objection, calls for speculation. I'm going to openly ask you to speculate. And here, I really do want to ask you, for your broader context outside writing this particular book about this particular person, can be easily dismissed perhaps as a craven figure, a racist, an opportunist, any number of other things. You could say, look, he's a skilled charlatan. We've already elected one of those as president. So maybe it doesn't say that much that he's found success in the media ecosystem. It does say something profound, though, which is the second part of the subtitle of your book, about the unraveling of the conservative party, about something truly profound that's happened to America. So part of what you're observing in this book is the evolution of Tucker Carlson. A part of what is the way he responded. Maybe it was his inner core, maybe it was his being very shrewd about seeing incentives, but the way he responded to changing incentives in the world. Where do you think those changing incentives came from? Or more pointedly, maybe, what did change? What were the changing incentives? Why did there begin to become such a return on the right to being a griper, to being more extreme, to being more of a populist, to being more racist? Was there a dividing line? What fundamentally changed in all of your work as a reporter?
Oh God, it's like so multi-causal, right? I mean, look, like you can't underestimate the importance of electing a black president in 2008 and the backlash that triggered. You can't underestimate the return, I guess, of like political correctness in the form of like extreme wokeism that I think has like led people, not, it doesn't excuse it, but it has led people to sort of stake out more aggressively offensive positions because they're angry at what they consider to be sort of the censoriousness of like elite society. You can't underestimate like the decimation of local news and print journalism and the way in which information is now conveyed. There's no kind of like shared reality anymore. There's no sort of shared sources of truth. you can't underestimate like the toll that just neoliberal economic policy took on large segments of the country in terms of like geographically and class wise. I mean, all these things come into play. It's the same things that led to the election of Donald Trump. I think they create this kind of media environment we now live in, and all of these factors are pouring into it. And you can't just say it's one thing, but it's a multitude of factors. And I think I wanted to write the book to focus on Tucker because I feel like you can kind of narrow things down a little bit just within his small little world, but all of those huge outside factors definitely like play a role in that as well. I don't know, does that make sense?
It makes
it's sort of
sense.
like
I'm trying to, well, first of all, I wanted to answer Cynthia Rice's question about Tucker is only on X on his own website. How many people followed him to X? The answer is he currently has about 30 million followers across X, YouTube, TikTok, and I don't know what his other platforms are, but like 4chan, Rumble.
yeah.
I don't know, like, is there something even more right-wing and scarier than that? Like pepethefrog.com, whatever it is that he's on. I mean, to your answer, I don't know, it's complete, it's true. I'm sort of scientifically unsatisfied by it because I agree that clearly it's multifactorial, right? Like, about the time that you were like becoming a hotshot reporter, I was kind of toiling away on Capitol Hill. So we had very different perspectives on this.
We thought the same thing. Yeah.
But we were kind of like looking at the same thing happen from very different ends. And I feel like the blind man and the elephant. Like, I'm kind of grasping small pieces of it. And, I've got a hold of the tail. And so I think the elephant's a snake. Like I don't really have, now I have a large theory about that I could bore the shit out of you with. It would definitely make a book that very, very few people would read. But, I think there is a confluence of several things that came together. I think that there was a recognition on the right that, moderating doesn't drive eyeballs and it doesn't drive earballs, and it's better to be trending than to be popular. And I think it's better to be provocative and to be hate viewed. And some people caught on to that. And I think the right wing was much better at it than the left. I think that's a factor. I think the money is a factor. And I think the economic dislocation is a factor. And, I've talked about on this show before, the best piece of political science research that I've read in recent years is a study of congressional districts that were most exposed to the effects of trade. And in the mid-2000s, if they were already somewhat right-leaning or majority white, then they became Trump districts. If they were somewhat left-leaning or majority minority, they became Bernie Sanders districts. And so clearly there was some kind of economic pressure point that led people toward, I'm not going to call Bernie Sanders like equivalent extreme as Donald Trump, but that led people to more extreme and more disruptive political messaging.
Yes.
And clearly there's a factor in that as well. And when you read in your book and in appraisals of your book about figures like Nick Fuentes, it does seem like there is a whole segment of disenchanted, dislocated people, especially young people, who are finding an affiliation here, and they're finding it through these platforms, and there is something in the kind of disintegration of the media. Anyway, I'm not really going anywhere in particular with it, other than to say I'm kind of in search of it. And I think one of the things that I'm kind of, as I work my way through your book, that I'm hoping to get a better understanding of, what among all those factors was the biggest driver? What really led to the change? Because I don't think Carlson was a driver. I think he was a passenger. I think he was a cagey passenger on the wave. And what was it that he was picking up on that was really creating the push? That's and so anyway, I wanted to see if you
I think he was picking up on grievance. I think he was picking up on grievance. I think that drives so much of it. And in his particular case, it's white grievance. And I think Trump picked up on it as well. And I think that is a huge driver, because so much can fit under that umbrella. If your politics is driven by grievance, then your politics can basically just serve as a vehicle for pissing off the people you dislike. And it doesn't really matter how you do it as long as you do it. And the one sort of through line with like Trump, despite all of his inconsistent sort of policy proposals and views and everything, like he is very consistent in being able to like piss off the people that they don't like, that his supporters don't like, and that ultimately they keep on coming back to him for that reason. And like the title of the book is "Hated by All the Right People," which was something Tucker himself said. He was toasting Viktor Orban and saying what a wonderful job Viktor Orban did, and his final piece of praise to Viktor Orban was you were truly hated by all the right people. And that insight into what drives so much of our politics today, and right now it's driving it on the right, like it's starting to drive it on the left too. And I don't think the left is immune from any of this stuff. I think the right has picked up on it sooner than the left did. But I think like the absolute kind of distrust of institutions and distrust of figures who have associations with institutions, like that has obviously taken hold on the right, but it's coming to the left too. And I think it'll be really fascinating to watch what happens in this 2028 Democratic presidential contest, because the people we think of as, the usual sort of suspects in terms of the candidates, they all have these institutional affiliations. They're all like, sitting governors or members of Congress or former cabinet officials. Like, I don't know what that gets you anymore. And I think in some ways it serves as a strike against you. And, we all like sort of roll our eyes and laugh about Stephen A. Smith, and God, that would, I don't know, having him as a presidential candidate seems a little nuts. But at the same time, like the conditions that created Donald Trump on the right, I see those existing on the left now too. And
Oh gosh.
I don't know if it'll be Stephen A. Smith or someone like that, but I think liberals like to tell themselves we're immune from this stuff, and I don't think they are.
Dude, I literally had a conversation with my 12-year-old and his friend as I drove them to swim practice last night. Would you take the proposition of being as hated as Stephen A. Smith if you could have $100 million? And they were both of their generation. They were like, hell yeah. And I'm like, no, I don't want that. But
you weep for the future. Yeah.
I do weep for the future. I'm helping to create the future. It's my fucking fault. I do want to bring this full circle real quick to a point you were just making before we wrap, which is this question of, is Tucker Carlson in the Epstein files? Has anyone checked? The answer is yes, he does. His name does appear. I haven't gotten a Jamie Raskin-esque deep dive into this question. He certainly doesn't appear the million times that Donald Trump's name appears in the Epstein files, 950,000 of which were redacted for no reason by the Department of Justice. But he does appear in there. It may just be kind of like along with many other major media figures, but it does bring up a connection to the final point you were just making, which there does seem to be a turn, and we're seeing it in this Epstein story that's occurring on the left as well. And Lefty Gramps, I agree with you. I don't think anyone's making a both sidesism here intentionally, that both the left and the right are equally riled up, angry, and looking to burn everything down. Not at all. But I think what you're seeing in the Epstein story emerge is this sense that, like, this view of the world that used to be confined to like crazy conspiracy circles, that there is like this crazy elite that's taking advantage of the rest of us and doing horrible, sinful, criminal things. It turns out to kind of be true and very much in our face. And these people have infiltrated the current presidential administration. And it really intersects with the deep distrust of institution that occurs on both sides. And I seriously wonder if there's going to be in 2028 a current elected office holder who ascends to the top of either party's nomination. I seriously wonder about that. I think it's an interesting point, especially given Gretchen Whitmer and AO not so awesome performance at the Munich Security Conference over the weekend. Of course, one could say like they were a fuck of a lot more coherent than the president of the United States. So like, why should it really matter? But I don't know that there's an advantage to being an insider anymore. For whatever reason, that's what's in the water right now. I picked up on it, and he's an avatar for everything kind of horrible that's happened to American politics over the last quarter century. All right, the book is hated by all the right people. Hold on, I'm going to splash it up on the screen because I usually like when I have authors on to hold it up in back of me, but I can't do it because it's an audio book, and I'm not going to hold up my screen on my phone because then people would see how old my phone is. Hold on. I'm going to put this up on the screen. You have a Z last name, so it's all organized alphabetically. There we go. Hated by all the right people. Tucker Carlson and the Unraveling of the Conservative Mind. Jason, are you working on anything next, or you're just kind of enjoying the book tour and you're...
Oh, no. I'm trying to do my day job. Yeah, no, I definitely am. I'm working on a story right now, but I won't talk about it until it comes out. But it has nothing to do with Tucker Carlson. I'll say that much.
All right. It will be anxiously awaited by us all. All right, Jason, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for having me on. I really appreciate it. And thank you for tolerating the background noise.
Hey, it's authentic. If nothing else, it's highly, highly authentic. All right. In the meantime, everyone out there, sorry for all the technical yips that we've had over the last 2 weeks. They were better this week than they were last week, but we will continue to work on them. Gosh darn it, I know we're under attack by the billionaires, the trolls, the bots. Someone is trying to take this show down, but we are going to keep forging ahead and doing our best. And in the meantime, over the next week, stay safe, be well. We'll see you soon.